when you have the bravery to imagine and the will to get things done. That's Africanacity. That's ABSA. Corporate and Investment Banking.
That's right, you're watching Africa Trade and Business. I'm Bronwyn Seaborn. In this episode, we take a look at food security in Africa amid the war in Ukraine. And we discuss the adoption of AI in the banking sector. So let's get straight into it. Well, Ukraine's government says it will not use grain as a weapon against food security in Africa, despite several African countries not opposing Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the United Nations. In Kiev, the continued production and export of grain is one of the country's top priorities. But as Gary Alfonso reports, the impact of war has seriously damaged grain exports and is threatening grain prices. Let's take a look.
In a country consumed by war, the privately owned Nibulon company has suffered more than most grain exporters in Ukraine. The country supplies a third of the world's grain, but since the war, Nibulon has lost the equivalent of 8 billion rands in exports. Only 40% of its staff are still working, and almost 700 staff members have chosen to vacate their posts temporarily to take up arms against the Russian invaders. Those who remain continue the task of ensuring that good quality grain from farmers reach local and international markets. Grain prices increased sharply after Russia invaded Ukraine 2 years ago, and only a steady supply from Ukraine and opening export corridors via the Black Sea has brought grain prices down again. At companies like Nibulon, the battle continues to keep operations going, and billion-dollar expansion plans already started before the conflict are on hold for now.
We lost more than 40% of our staff. At this moment we're working for 30% of all our capacity of our company. 50% of our storages, terminal storages of grains was stopped because they are building in the river ports. Four terminals was occupied and 2 terminals was destroyed by the Russian Federation. And all our fleet and shipyard was blocked in the Nikolaev region, and more than 2 years we cannot evacuate our civil fleet from the Nikolaev.
In the corridors of power in the capital Kiev, the issue of grain and food security is as important as defending Ukraine's sovereignty. But the government says it will never use grain as a political tool, not even against countries in Africa that openly side with Russia.
When it comes to helping Africa or Asia or Latin America, we never look at the motives, but we look at the lists published by the United Nations, which introduce or highlight those countries which are in a dire need for food.
Signs of the destruction of war remain everywhere in Ukraine, but signs of rebuilding are also evident everywhere, especially in areas around Kiev. But it's also clear international support is needed now. Gary Alfonso, Business Day TV, Ukraine.
In the meantime, the adoption of artificial intelligence is on the rise, but according to reports, the banking sector has not fully realized the potential of AI, with only 32% of global financial service providers using it. Heidi Custers, the Director for Digital Transformation for Middle East and Africa at Backbase, discussed this in more detail and drilled into the trends observed in the African banking space. Here's that conversation.
Banks are typically slow to move, but sometimes the elephant can dance. So what we are seeing is AI specifically being deployed in the customer experience space, specifically customer service. So where it is particularly effective for banks to enter the AI is in the robo-advisory space and, of course, co-pilots. So whether you are deploying AI to help investment or to just scale customer service a little bit more than a call center could to get to our clients faster, that's typically where they're dipping their toes, but not really widespread use as of yet.
I mean, that brings me to my next question, because I wanted to talk about what we've been seeing on the global sphere, where we've had a lot of the big banks, for example, US Bank Morgan Stanley launching an AI chatbot. How has this kind of played out in the African space?
Well, go and look at some of the chatbots that are being launched, specifically East Africa and even places like Mauritius. I think in South Africa, we're still lagging a little bit when it comes to that. Our chatbots still seem to be a little bit more, less smart, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
But we've seen some interesting plays from KCB in Kenya and Mauritius Commercial Bank, where they're exploring the use of, as I've said, Copilot, which is a technology where a customer experience expert can get a chatbot to essentially give them and prompt them with responses, but they can still control the situation so that it doesn't feel robotic, nor does that chatbot actually give them responses that are canned and therefore not useful. So there's where we're seeing some interesting use cases, and then I think that'll move fully into AI-powered chatbot as we get more comfortable on the continent to be able to deploy it with cultural significance, local languages. These are the things that are different where we come from than the US, for instance, which is more homogenous.
I mean, when we talk about AI, there are always risks that come across. For example, we look at job cuts. And in the South African context, I mean, we have an unemployment rate at over 30%. How has that filtered through, and some of the risks that have come through on that front on the banking sector?
So I would say that the biggest danger of AI affecting employment on the continent would be in customer experience. Although, to be frank, and this is my own opinion, I feel like there's a lot of scaling that still needs to happen in customer experience before it starts affecting jobs. So, you know, our banking clients on the continent are used to waiting in long queues. They're used to holding for a long time on the phone. So we're going to see a progression where AI is used first to scale, but then there might come a tipping point where it ends up taking over for the humans. And I think we need to watch that. The regulators on the continent, I think, are watching that, as well as the banks themselves. For the most part, they're very responsible when it comes to balancing technology with employment.
And I think that's very important, because we need to alleviate these kind of fears so more and more banks can adopt it, and consumers and the general public can start being comfortable with using these tools. Now, I want to come back to talk about the kind of collaborative efforts that Backbase has worked on with the African banks.
Of course. So if you go and look at, there's some really incredible partnerships that we have on the continent. I mentioned Mauritius Commercial Bank as a really great example. So some of the work we've been doing with MCB has resulted in them launching an app that is basically allowing the island to go cashless, right? It's called Juice. And it's become so ubiquitous in Mauritius that you don't pay someone anymore, you juice them. And that is an incredible, I think, example of a partnership between a financial technology company like Backbase and an established bank to use technology to better the lives of the people in their country.
I know you are also working on something with Standard Bank. Would you like to tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So we partner with Standard Bank across 5 of their geographies on the continent, and we're specifically looking at modernizing their engagement banking across some of the mobile and internet banking-based banking experiences. So you'll see we recently launched an application on Backbase in Namibia, for instance, in Kenya, and the Angola app has been in the market for a while, called SB24. So that is a partnership that we've had for many years, and we'll continue to work on to grow into Africa and to, as Standard Bank says, it can be, right? That's the way our partnership tries to work, is we try to think of the possibilities together, and it's truly a partnership that is symbiotic. We both have skin in the game here. We care about Africa, and through Standard Bank, we want to drive its growth.
Heidi, before I let you go, in the spirit of International Women's Day, now we know women make up 60% of the 400 million financially excluded Africans. What specific challenges do women in Africa face when it comes to accessing financial products?
Now, this is an incredibly difficult statistic and one that's very close to my heart. So obviously access to technology is one, and that affects both men and women, but women are disproportionately affected because they're most of the time not the primary breadwinner. And because of that, they essentially aren't able to access technology to uplift themselves. So what we are seeing to overcome the challenges around access to tech, but also to financial literacy, while women may not be the primary breadwinner, we are often the one tasked with the household finances, and yet are not given that financial literacy to do so. We're seeing loads of very interesting use cases around the world. For me, one of the most interesting ones to borrow from to attack this challenge on our continent actually comes from India. There was a study done, started in MIT, and then it's been scaled into an in-production application in a company called Vito, or microfinance.ai, which looks to partner all of the 100 million borrowers of microfinancing in India with many of the banks, but also the NGOs who are looking to finance women-owned businesses. Now, I think that is something we need to look at. Now, whether it be governments, NGOs, or banks themselves, we need to attack the problem of financial exclusion in women with technology and with matching the women who need the money with the banks and the financial NGOs who have it, using mobile technology, using AI-powered low typing and low literacy type of generative AI chat, because this will allow you to talk in your local language, and then you overcome the financial literacy barrier. For me, as I said, you can see I'm passionate about this.
Yes.
I think we look to places it's been done before and we replicate and scale it. That's what we can do in Africa.
And that's where we leave things for this week's episode of Africa Trade and Business. From me, Bronwyn Seaborn, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now.
When you have the bravery to imagine and the will to get things done, that's Africanacity. That's ABSA. Corporate and Investment Banking.